Hey guys, so I will again start with a quick reminder that I have a ebook that's ready for pre-order at gum.co/nerdyfriendbook. I'll put the URL in the description below. Alright, so today I want to talk about nerds and nerdiness. If I had the resources and the skills, I would turn this into a very elaborate video about the history of nerds and, all the different terms that people use. Nerds, geeks, dweebs, dorks, all of those things. I would go into the history of it. I would go into the etymology of it. But I don't yet. So I'm just going to do like an ad-lib video about what I mean when I talk about nerds and nerding out. So to me, I use the term nerd positively as a term of affection even. I use it to describe myself. I've described myself as a library nerd, as an internet nerd. Just I post nerdy content, and I'm a big fan of nerding out in general. And for me, I think growing up, I just had a good time being a nerd, and I was never really bullied for it very much. So I don't. I mean, maybe a little bit. I don't know. Yeah, that's something to explore separately, and maybe I'll get into that later. But more broadly, I just want to talk about how I think that there is still a lot of room in the world for quality nerd content. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, so when I say, let's approach it like as an adjective rather than, so I don't want to get into are you a nerd or are you not. I don't want to do any gatekeeping. I think that's unproductive and not very interesting and frustrating even. Rather, I want to talk about what it's like to nerd out, right? So nerding as a process. And to me, being a nerd, right, is about being earnest about any subject matter, even all subject matters. And I feel that all of the best things in the world are produced by nerds. Whether it's, YouTube content, so much of the good stuff is produced by nerds. Even, makeup, you can have makeup geeks and nerds who dig into, why is it interesting? What's cool about it? What can you do with it? What can you make? And, iPhones are made by nerds, tech nerds, movies are made by nerds. And it's just people who really get into whatever it is that they like and then dive into it like earnestly and happily. So there's a confidence and conviction about being a nerd that I really enjoy. And sometimes I say that, the problem with Twitter as a whole for me is that there's too much sermonizing, too much in-group, out-group policing, too much. There's not enough nerd posting, and I just want to constantly be flooded with content from earnest nerds. So, my book is titled Friendly Ambitious Nerd. I have a video about ambition that I published yesterday, and I'll be doing another video about friendliness. But the thing that I almost don't even think about as much is nerdiness, being a nerd, being someone who is curious, someone who is willing to ask questions. A recurring theme that I've encountered online is that, so one of the things that nerds do is ask questions, and question asking is, to me, surprisingly loaded thing. Like, some people can't appreciate or relate to the idea that some other people might be asking questions from a place of genuine curiosity. And I am aware of the fact that, you can weaponize questions asking. Like, there's this phenomenon in that I think there's one of the moderators of, I think, Ask Historians from Reddit said that there is a pattern of trolling that happens, which they call just asking questions. So they call it jacking off, JAQ. And it's possible to ask questions from a place of bad faith and there's a way of demanding evidence or demanding explanations for things that you might put on some kind of veneer of earnest nerdiness. And I don't really know if it's entirely possible to come up with some kind of simplistic framework or algorithm to help people distinguish between a genuinely earnest nerd who really just wants to learn and someone who's asking questions from a place of bad faith to try and unnerve somebody else, or to try and make people uncomfortable, or to try and derail a conversation. And there's no easy answer to that. So I'm not going to try and provide an easy answer to that. But I just want to get people to consider the possibility that asking questions can be a good thing, that beginners exist, and there's like a infinite pool of beginners, right? And I do have sympathy for anybody who's kind of who's in a position of public influence, or just public figures who have to deal with nerdy question askers every day, nerdy, good or bad, right? Like so I encourage nerds who want to ask questions to do a little bit of research. So we do have this cool thing called Google that you can use to get up to speed on the basics of a lot of things. And I think there are it shouldn't be too difficult to figure out if something is contentious or some. So I was talking to my friend Kat recently, and I was telling her that one of the things that I don't understand is kind of the history of Jewishness and anti-Semitism, and just so I'm a Singaporean, I'm Indian, and I'm in Southeast Asia, and so I'm very far removed from American and Western politics and culture and history. Like I get some of it from television, right, and from just mass media, but I don't. There's a lot of things that people know about a culture through kind of back channel communications, and I don't know what I don't know. So a question that comes up for me in my head is that I don't even know if I want to talk about it on YouTube because it's a public channel, but just there are things that I simply don't understand and I don't know the details. I mean, I've read like the Wikipedia pages and I've Googled around, but I don't have a very good sense of the nuance in racial history in the US, for example. I try to get educated as much as I can, but yeah, there are things that I can discern are kind of contentious topics that have, the well has been poisoned for generations, and anybody kind of asking questions about things in these spaces may come across as clueless or bad faith, and I'm aware of that. But yeah, so those are questions. I guess what I want to say is that some of those questions are best asked in person, because I think when you ask questions in public, it's very natural for people to assume that public questions anybody asking questions in public may have some sort of agenda. So even if you don't, right? Even if you don't have an agenda, one of my friends, Ayla, she is known on Twitter for doing polls about kind of about ethics related questions. So she asks ethics. She does ethics related polls. So she asks questions about why is bestiality bad exactly? Like what is the reason for it? And then some people are like, how can you even ask that? That's such a horrible question to ask. And I can see both sides. Like and I am kind of grateful that there's somebody who has developed a reputation for asking questions that are difficult and whatnot. Because if nobody ever asks those questions, then you're almost entirely dependent on back channel culturization, back channel enculturing. I don't know what's the right word to use, but and there will always be people who are not privy to those conversations. And so, like, how do you learn if you're not allowed to ask questions? And so it's complex, it's nuanced, and a big part of why I'm setting up this YouTube channel and I'm making videos is because I want to help kind of move conversations in a better direction, in a more nourishing sphere. I want people to be able to practice good faith with each other and ask each other questions. And I don't necessarily know if it's something that can be solved at the super public level. I'm figuring this out myself as I go along. But I think what I do know is that it's worth trying to find and create spaces where people can ask questions without judgment. And it should be like an opt-in thing, so that if people don't feel comfortable discussing it, then they shouldn't be subjected to, an interrogation about it. So one of the things that, and it's always easy to talk about things that don't personally affect you, right? So for me, I'm a guy, obviously, right? And so it would be almost too easy for me to ask questions about, let's say gender issues, trans issues. So I'm very grateful for people like Natalie Wynn, ContraPoints, who produce content that speaks to the mainstream audience, that kind of gives us clueless people like an entry point to thinking about these things and to learn about these things. And I hope to do my version of that in whatever way I can. And one of my areas is race, I guess. I'm a brown guy. I am Tamil, Singaporean Tamil. And anywhere in the world I go, people are going to assume that I'm Indian, except India, where people from India can tell that I'm not like an Indian citizen because I don't speak English with the same accent. I don't dress the same way. I don't carry myself the same way. So, when I go to India, they're like, "Oh, are you from Malaysia?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm from Singapore," and they get it. But yeah, so there's nuance to racial dynamics. There's nuance to everything, right? And one of the things that I'm gonna be talking about is kind of I'm gonna dig into the whole idea of cultural appropriation, which I think the conversation about cultural appropriation is almost overly Western centric. Like again, there's so much nuance to this, and I'll make a separate video about that for sure. But just there's truth to the fact that culture is human culture is fundamentally about copying and remixing and experimenting. And I think the idea that something is either appropriation or appreciation is almost too simplistic. And sometimes you do need simple lines to try and make sense of an issue, but it's just a starting point. Almost everything you could say about anything complex can only be a starting point. You can't conclude something easily and decide that that's that, and this is how we do things, and that is how the way the world is. Everything's complex, and I believe that we need people who are sensitive and discerning and kind of inspiring. So describing myself as inspiring is probably a bit narcissistic or something, but I mean when I say inspiring, I don't mean in like some grandiose sense. I mean we need people who give other people a vision of a future that is more friendly. That's my opinion, right? I believe that we could coordinate better. We could have better conversations. We could find a more perfect union, right? And it requires people with good faith who are willing to listen and are willing to tolerate difficulty. So another one of my talking points is that let's take the idea of model minorities. So a model minority is someone who is amongst guys. It could be a girl, it could be a woman, right? A woman can be like a model minority CEO amongst a group of male CEOs, for example. And there's this difficult idea that if you are an outsider, right? If you are someone who's a minority ethnically, or maybe you're queer, right? Like you're gay, whatever, you're different than the mainstream. There is this sense that to survive and to thrive in an environment that isn't designed for you, you have to kind of be unrealistically kind of you have to tick all the boxes. You have to live up to a higher standard than everybody else in that mainstream. And that's not fair, but it's almost necessary, I think. So it's complex because I wouldn't say to a group of people of whatever group, right? Whether it's a minority or women or whatever, I wouldn't say that publicly. So it's complex. This video is complex as well because I'm still like a small unknown guy, so I can say these things and assume that I'm kind of speaking to a small audience of close friends for the time being. And I would say privately with my close friends that it is true that to some degree that model minorities earn representation that so like that less perfect minorities don't get, which is not fair again, but like, these more palatable kind of what's the word? Palatable is part of the idea, but also kind of just people who make themselves, or maybe they already were that way, people who are kind of easier to swallow for the mainstream audience that is nervous and afraid of the other, right? These people almost have to, we do depend on those people to kind of get their foot in the door for representation for everybody else. And so it's a team effort. You need everybody, right? So you need the model minorities to kind of get the door open, and you also need the radicals and the so-called extreme people who are angry and protesting, and so yeah, you have that kind of Professor X kind of person who is like trying to fight for compromise and baby steps, and then you have like the revolutionaries, the Magnetos, the Malcolm X's, and my view is that we kind of like progress requires everyone, right? You can't say that we only have this group of people or you only have that group of people. Anyway, this was supposed to be a video about nerds, and somehow we have come across to cultural appropriation and representation for minorities. But that is one of the things that I am a nerd about. I am a nerd about culture. I'm a nerd about human progress. My grand kind of true north end goal is I want the whole species to flourish. I have this idea that I sometimes use called the light of human consciousness. And I feel that, like libraries are the lighthouses, the churches of the light of human consciousness. And, it's artists and writers and creatives and technologists. Like there are people who move the species forward in terms of culture, in terms of who expand our imaginations, our moral imaginations, our social imaginations, our idea of what justice is, and then we try to be more equitable and fair to the world and to the people of the world. That is something that I nerd out about. That it's so that we can get more people get more people's voices into the game, right? So right now, I get to say these things because I have internet access, I have a video camera and a mic, and I know how to use YouTube, and I can speak in English, right? And there's like billions of people who don't have that, and I would like them to also have it so that they can also participate and criticize me potentially. Just whatever it takes to move the culture forward, and like I'm like a cultural accelerationist, you could say, maybe. I'm not a fan of labels. If I had to pick a label, I would pick nerd, right? Because I with this video, I want to make the case that everybody probably has some nerd in them, and whether you're a movie nerd or a knitting nerd or whatever it is that you're interested in, whatever it is that excites you, moves you, whatever it is that you care about, even if your friends aren't really into it, I recommend and advise that you allow yourself to be a nerd on that front and to share your nerdy thoughts. Go on Twitter and do it. Come on YouTube and do it. Find the other nerds, right? Find other people who are also interested in these things. Share your thoughts with them. Be kind and supportive to them. Celebrate them. I believe that nerding out is kind of almost a culture independent. So a lot of public discourse ends up being very contained by ethnicity, by geography, by you're friends with the people around you, you're friends with the people who think like you, look like you, all those things. And I do feel that since we now have the ability, I mean, we've had it for some time, but it's accelerating, right? Since we have the ability to reach out to other nerds who are nerding out about their interests that may intersect with our interests, I believe that this is a way that we can build relationships across the planet, right? And there's this quote by Margaret Mead, and she says, "Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." I may mix up that quote a little bit somewhere, but I believe that if we can build networks of relationships around the world, and being nerds about movies, about whatever it is, music, artists, artistry, right? I believe that networks of nerds become networks of friends, and I believe that a global mesh of personal relationships around the world, across countries, across everything, right? That will be a force for good, in my opinion. It will be a force for creativity. It will be a force for kinship, a force for collaboration. It will make us be less inclined to war, inclined to conflict. We'll want to resolve conflict more productively because we see ourselves in our fellow nerds elsewhere. I mean, a bunch of this is more about my video about friends. Right, so back to nerds. Nerding is good, in my opinion. I think sports nerds, music nerds, whatever kind of nerd you are, I accept you, I embrace you, I encourage you to find other nerds and to support their nerdery, celebrate their nerdery, look up their nerdy content and share it with other people. We don't have to be embroiled in political conflict all the time, which isn't to say that I don't want politics in my movies or video games or anything like that. I don't believe that at all. I think everything is intrinsically political. I think that you can't escape or avoid politics, but I think so like I joke that I try to make my content like 30% nerd posting, 30% sermonizing, kind posting, and 30% shit posting. And the nerd posting is a component of kind of developing a shared humanity. Like politicizing things and talking about politics can very often become me telling you how to live your life, and me telling you to change the way you are, and me telling you stop doing this, do more of that kind of thing. And I'm almost talking about like charm, right? Like for me to persuade you to do something. And again, not everybody is equally persuaded of the same things in the same way, but I believe that I become a more persuasive person when people have a way, when I give people a way to relate to me. So sometimes people say, "Oh, this is respectability politics or relatability politics or whatever." But I try to operate in reality. I try to operate in the world the way the world works, and not the way I wish it was. Right? I wish the world was instantly beautiful and perfect and just. It's not. Right? So if I want the world to be more kind and more just, I have to find ways to not just. So one thing I do is try and find the other kind people and build relationships with them. But the other thing I try to do is to give people openings, to give people a chance to get to know me and to like me potentially, and to get interested in my politics. Right? So I'm not going to be talking about, oh, these are my politics. Am I a liberal or a conservative or whatever? I don't even know if I'm ever going to make content about that. But the point is, I think it's super cool for people to care about each other, right? I just want people to care about each other more. And I think that nerd posting, being a nerd, is a great way to find, you talk about what you care about, and you find other people who talk about what they care about, and you have conversations. And in that process of talking about what you each care about, you will come to care about each other. You get it? So that's the like almost the secret sauce in my experience. So I have a Twitter following of 18,000 people now, and my nerd posting has been a substantial part of how I've made friends, right? And yeah, we may disagree on stuff, and sometimes, people have ridiculous views, and I can't quite continue to associate with them potentially. I that's a topic for a whole other video maybe. But my point is that people can change, and so you have to find where on the spectrum you are comfortable being. So like my wife sometimes asks me why I spend so much time talking to deplorable characters, right? Like people who are men particularly, right? Who seem to let's say like men who don't seem to understand like the shit that women go through, right? Like my wife doesn't suffer fools gladly, but I do. Right? I almost see it as a little bit of my obligation maybe, or it's not like a burden. It's, you shouldn't have to do anything that you don't want to do, but if you have the capacity, if you have the strength, the time, the headspace, right? If you can, then it's something that I have found can be potentially very fulfilling. It can be very fulfilling to be a good example for other people and to invite them to be better, right? And I don't do this by saying you're a bad person, you should become a better person. Like who the fuck listens to that, right? It's more of, I am a person. I'm not a perfect, but I'm a person, right? I have my good and bad days, blah blah blah. I'm trying to be a better person. I try to be kind. I try to be nourishing. I try to be nerdy. I try to be fun. I try to focus on what is good, what is interesting. I try to do all of those things. And when I do that, I find that other good, kind people want to be my friend, right? And they want to nerd out with me. And I have found that to be very nourishing itself. I have found it to be a very wholesome, pro-social experience. I feel loved, right, by internet strangers. Some people will say that can't possibly be true, and that I must be hallucinating or whatever. But I've traveled across the planet and gone to other countries, and there are other nerds who are eager to meet me and receive me and host me in their homes, feed me, and treat me with so much love. All because of the way I conduct myself online, because they see me doing something that they feel is kind of nourishing and nerdy and supportive. And it almost feels criminal that I get to have this and lots of people don't. I've like kind of solved this problem for myself. I used to be a lonely kid. I used to be a kid who would read books alone and have no friends, right? But like I've figured out a solution for this for myself, and I just want to share it with other people. So tell me what you think, and tell me what you have been wanting to nerd out about, but you assume that other people wouldn't be interested. And I if you tweet me, so my YouTube channel doesn't yet have tons of comments. So, but you could be the first, and I will be expecting to get more comments as I continue to publish more videos. So you can, if you post in my comment section right now, you get to be like an early adopter. But if you feel like you just want a more ready audience, you can tweet me, and I can retweet you or reply to you, and you will make friends through me. That's kind of the game I'm trying to play here. I'm trying to introduce kind, friendly, ambitious nerds to each other, and let's do this. Let's do more of this stuff. Done.